Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to our very first episode. My name is Liz, and this is the Crime All Over podcast where we talk about true crime, mysteries, and the unexplained. Today I wanted to talk about an insanely tragic case, but also a resilient one. I'm just going to point out trigger warnings for assault, attempted M-word, and R-word. So YouTube strikes it if you use inappropriate words, so I'm just going to try to shorten the words real quick. The case I did want to talk about today was the Mary Vincent case, and you will probably be as shocked as I was when I read about it. The stuff that happened in the case, you usually hear it in movies, wrong place, wrong time. But anyways, it is pretty crazy, so let's get to it. Mary was born in 1963 in Las Vegas, Nevada. Her dad was serving in the military when he met her mother. She was working in the casino as a blackjack dealer. They got married and had 7 kids, including Mary, who was considered the middle child. Her dad was no longer serving and became a mechanic, mostly for the machines in the casinos to make more money for the family. In 1978, when Mary was 15 years old, her parents started going through a very, very rough divorce. So it was really hard time on everyone, and always especially the kids. Mary loved dancing and was a lead singer in many Las Vegas shows that her teacher would help set up for her, so this was always an aspiration for her to be a dancer. Mary also mentioned in articles that she would skip class or school, wear heavy makeup, really rebel at home too. So her parents, they were strict and they were not okay with this. Eventually Mary's dad had had enough, and on his way home from work, he was to confront Mary on her behavior. Her sister warned her that their dad was on their way, angry with a migraine, and Mary, afraid for her life, she said this is when she decided to run away. So I'm pretty sure her dad, in my opinion, was probably going to hit her, and she wanted to avoid it, and she ran away. But that's my own opinion and my interpretation of the interview she did when she spoke about it. So in 1970, this is when Mary runs away. This was pretty common occurrence in the 1970s, though, because there was like a huge spike in teen runaways during that time. I'm sure that we're all aware of like the movies and the pictures of the 1970s. So after she ran away, she first went to live with a boyfriend, but that didn't work out when he was arrested for assault charges. She then tried to live with a relative, but that also didn't work out, so she eventually ended up homeless, living on the streets and living very, very rough. September rolls in and Mary decided, enough of living on the streets. She was going to live with her grandfather in California. But with no money and no means, she decided to hitchhike her way there. She describes this decision as just being tired and living on the streets and desperate to get home. She was not trying to live on the edge, but she wasn't grasping the dangers that came along with hitchhiking. So again, something very extremely common during this period, and I read in a couple articles it was common to see when you're driving down a highway, you would see hitchhikers, especially teenagers, holding up signs where they needed to go, so when you pick them up, you know where to take them. And again, she was 15 and this is what she's seen. She thought it was okay. So the morning of September 28th, she gets up and holds to her decision to hitchhike to California. She gets up, she makes a sign, and she goes and stands by the highway. And then, coincidentally, there was 2 other girls hitchhiking, also with signs. So Mary is waiting, seeing if someone will pick her up, and she's waiting, and then to her surprise, someone does. Little did Mary know that this decision to get in that car with that stranger would tragically change the course of her entire life. An old blue van pulls up to the hitchhikers. Inside is an elderly man and states he only has room for one to take to their destination. Although the car was almost completely empty except for a paper bag, Mary took the offer, even when the other hitchhikers warned her not to, since it was really off for someone to offer one person a ride when they had room for more. She says that when she saw him, she got in the car and she really wasn't thinking about the type of person he was or what kind of situation it could end up. She just needed a ride home. She was tired. He seemed friendly and they did make small talk at first, but to her, there was really nothing concerning. There was a moment of awkward silence during the car ride where the man did touch her neck without her consent, only to ask if she was sick, but Mary brushed it off. She thought he was just a little off, and there was no other red flags that showed up. So the ride was long and she was exhausted, so during the ride, Mary decided to doze off. When she woke up, she noticed he was going the wrong way, and the road became to look more isolated than it was supposed to. She started to confront the man and demand he go towards California as promised. He reassured Mary and told her he just took a wrong turn, that California was the destination he was driving towards, that everything was going to be okay. Mary accepted this, but started to feel a bit uneasy about the man she knew nothing about. After a while, they eventually turned to a stop, when the driver told her he needed to use the bathroom, but could not wait for an actual rest stop like a gas station. He just needed to make a quick stop. Mary understood and again accepted his claim, but already came to the decision of tying her shoes in case she needed to run away. Her mentality at the time was to assume if anything at all was to go off, he was already older than her, so he would probably be slower than her, and she could outrun him. She just needed to make sure her laces were tied, just in case anything did happen. Once stopped, Mary got out of the car, stretched, and proceeded to tie her shoes. She heard a noise behind her and turned, only to have a sledgehammer hit the side of her head. She quickly fell to the ground, then came the second blow, and she fell unconscious. Now immobile, 15-year-old Mary was dragged back into the van, tied up to the car wall, and driven to a remote location towards the canyon. There Mary was inflicted with an insane and horrific amount of torture. Forced to strip and drink alcohol, she was repeatedly R-worded all night. When morning came, Mary cried and pleaded to be free. She even promised the horrible stranger she would not tell anyone of what happened. The horrible man put Mary on the road and took out a hatchet from his toolbox. He turned to her in a cold and vicious tone and said, "If you want to be set free, I'll set you free." Of course, Mary was confused and unaware. She didn't understand what the man was saying. He soon made it clear. The man swung and started to hack her left arm off, then the right. Mary tried to fight back, kicking and screaming at him, but it was in vain. Devastatingly, Mary felt everything, the blade of the hatchet, the burning of her arms, and the blood leaving her body. It took the horrible stranger only 6 hacks to sever both her arms off. Still very conscious, Mary was aware of everything that was going on, but play dead. Her attacker assumed she was dead, maybe from losing half the blood in her system, so he decided to grab her limp body and drag it towards a cliff, throwing her off onto a culvert. So a culvert would be like a concrete sewer drain, a tunnel where the water flows out. I mean, this guy just throws the body down, which, like, no remorse, no care in the world, he just gets rid of the body. So there alone in the middle of nowhere, Mary was statistically not supposed to survive. However, she heard a voice telling her she could not go to sleep. He will do this, what he did to her, he'll do it to somebody else, and she could not let that happen, never again. She covered up her wounds with dirt to stop the bleeding and climbed up the cliff. You heard me right, she had no arms, and she climbed up a 9-foot cliff. If that's not a story about not giving up, then I don't know what is, because you can either accept your fate and just lay there or die trying, and she survived. She explains on an episode of I Survived that she was naked and the sounds of the cars from the highway traffic actually helped guide her on where to reach the freeway. She had to raise her arms up so the muscles and the blood didn't fall out, and so she walked for 3 miles before a car slowed down, but then quickly passed her because they were probably freaked out at what was happening, what they were seeing. Another car did stop and came to her aid. It was 2 people on vacation who had originally taken a wrong turn and gotten lost when they saw Mary, and when they did, they stopped to her aid. They immediately called 911, and she eventually was seen and transported to a hospital. The only words that she could make out was, "He R-worded me." In the hospital, Mary worked with detectives to compose a sketch of her attacker. She even stopped sleeping in order to complete it. When the photo was posted, the sketch was almost a perfect match that someone immediately called the police to identify their neighbor. His name was Lawrence Singleton. Police located and quickly arrested him at his ex-wife's apartment. Lawrence Singleton was born in Tampa, Florida on July 1927. He was one of 8 siblings in his family. In a Tampa Bay Time article, an official who lives in California recalls Lawrence in their youth and stated, "It's as if someday, somewhere, I was expecting something to happen." Another man who knew Lawrence when he was 9 said he didn't think anything bad of him, but a relative of Lawrence did describe him as a ticking time bomb. He worked most of his life transporting goods on water, which is known as a merchant seaman, and never really had trouble with the law. That's how much I could get on him and his childhood and his youth. I honestly read about his days after the trial. I read a lot about his life after what he did to Mary, but not much else. I guess his family members just did not want to talk to reporters, didn't want to do interviews. I did read one article that they considered him a walking embarrassment. So 6 months after the events, the trial started and Mary did have to face him in court. This time, she had fitted prosthetics and her dreams of being a dancer was over. Since she did have to end up getting surgery, the doctors had to use the skin from her legs in order to put it on her arms, and this had affected her way of dancing ever since. On March 1979, a jury convicted Lawrence of kidnapping, attempted M-word, forcible R-word, I don't know if I could use this word, sodomy, and forced OC. And you could probably look up what the OC means if you just Google his name and check what he was arrested for. I'm trying not to say the words because I know YouTube will strike me, so okay, hopefully that makes sense. But he was eventually guilty and sentenced to 14 years in jail. So back then, that was the max in California. Mary recalls leaving the courthouse and having to pass him after testifying. She says she heard him say, "If it's the last thing I do, I will finish the job." Now, these last words did haunt her for many, many years to come, and you'll find out why. Although being sentenced for only 14 years, he only served 8 years. He got off on good behavior and was involved in some prison program where he was teaching assistant in prison. This is apparently why he got paroled early. Because of this, it didn't take long for outrage to happen, and the public demanded change. California law did start handing out stricter and longer sentences to offenders, and made parole supposedly a bit more harder because of this. But once released, Lawrence was taken to a local town in the Bay Area. The locals were not having it. I mean, they set up a whole mob with signs, and they were like, no, they demanded him out. I mean, even in another town close by, when they moved him, they had another mob, and this mob had firearms and demanded police to remove him and locate him somewhere else. It was that crazy. Police tried to locate him in another area, but everywhere he was met with mobs or a crowd. Eventually, he was placed in a trailer on the property of San Quentin Jail for 1 year while he was on probation. After that 1 year of probation, no one allowed him to stay in California, so he eventually moved back to Tampa, Florida, his hometown. He was registered as a felon, but not an S predator. The S predator law, I'm sure you guys can look what S stands for, is what requires individuals convicted of S crimes to register as S offenders. We know that now we can look it up in the database. We can look up and see, who did what and who lives near me. Now, this law was not put in place until 1995. And Lawrence Singleton did not have to register since his crimes were before 1995. So since he was never registered, he was never monitored. He was arrested in 1990 and 1991 for shoplifting, and he did serve some, the little bit of jail time, but that's about it. After that, he did rely heavily on family to help him support him financially. I did read that he was close with one of his brothers, and he was living for a short time in a trailer behind his nieces, but then she kicked him out because he would constantly be drinking, so he was an alcoholic at that time. He then had to move on a property his family owned, and for a while it was okay. He He would fix it up, and his brother gave him the money to remodel the inside and fix the lawn. And all the neighbors thought it was really cool. Like, they would literally come in and he would show them around, and everything was modern and updated, and it was really nice. Although at first some neighbors heard he went to jail, they were afraid, but then they slowly warmed up to him. Some of them didn't even know what he went to jail for. He would smile, cook steaks, and bring it over to them, even let a 2-year-old play with his pit bull puppy on the lawn while he made small talk with her mom. And he even went so far as to clean the paw prints of his cat off the neighbor's car. He joined a bowling league. He was considered a friendly, good neighbor. I mean, when they asked him why he went to jail, he said he was framed, and they believed him. Once they really found out about his crimes, some did keep their distance, but they accepted him in their neighborhood. At this time, he was living off Social Security checks and his brother's money. So I guess retirement was really good to him. And this facade he wanted to show, in reality, he was a binge drinker, and some days he would be drunk on the lawn, out of his mind, getting a warning from police. Only a warning. Others say he was a nice guy, but his family members did talk to neighbors asking to keep an eye on him in case anything happens because of his alcohol intake. Once his brother died of cancer, he soon became depressed and attempted to commit suicide, until a neighbor intervened and he was checked into a psych ward. The suicide note was found, and he only thanked his brother for helping him financially. He did receive some therapy, I guess, but was let go even though a psychiatrist told him and his family that he was psychotic. During all this, Mary Vincent lived in fear of her attacker, that one day he would come for her and good on his word. She received a lot of therapy, but mostly refused to talk to the media. The court did award Mary with a civil judgment against Lawrence and was awarded more than $2 million. However, she never received a dime from him since he was always broke and he took money from his brother instead of making his own money. He was living off checks from Social Security. So let's fast forward to the spring of 1997. Now around 6 o'clock, a neighbor who helped Lawrence with renovating his home dropped by his house. I'm not sure why he was there, but he was there. He started to hear very loud noises coming from inside the home, and he decided to investigate. There he saw Lawrence in the living room, beating and choking on a nude woman who was yelling for help. He quickly called 911, and the police responded. Once Lawrence opened the door, police asked what happened, and Lawrence responded he simply injured himself cutting vegetables. The cop could clearly see the bloody body laying on the floor behind Lawrence, and his victim was named Roxanne Hayes, and she was found to be stabbed multiple times. She ended up dying in the hospital. She was a mother of 3 who was known to be an S-worker. She did have many arrests on her record regarding drugs and S-working, but police still don't know why she was there at Lawrence's home, since her boyfriend had stated she only went out to buy groceries. But police do believe that she was at Lawrence's home to provide him with S services. And he was arrested and then sent to court. At his trial, Mary traveled all the way to Florida to testify at Lawrence's sentencing. She described the attack and all the fear after his assault. He was eventually found guilty and sentenced to death. He was made to stay on death row in a northern Florida prison, but died in 2001 from cancer. Mary eventually married and had kids, but it ended in divorce, and she again reportedly had a hard time financially. She had stated she would actually end up in abandoned gas stations to find shelter with her kids, since she never saw a dime from her attacker and the government stopped giving her disability checks from a small settlement she won in a car crash. So she had no way of making money. She was left with very few options. However, even though she went through a horrific attack and suffered tremendously, and she had to face her attacker twice, she still persevered, and that was her motto. You cannot overthink bad things happening to good people, you just have to keep going, and she did. When she could not afford new prosthetics that would cost her around $15,000, she ended up creating her own from old parts from electronics and cars, and she even ended up creating one for bowling. When she suffered from PTSD and horrific nightmares, she decided to speak out and become an advocate for victims' rights. When she was struggling financially, she started to create art, pastel chalk art of portraits of female superheroes and people to bring in income. And she's really good at it. I was kind of shocked at how well the art is. I mean, I can barely draw a tree, let alone a whole portrait. So she was able to persevere even after the attack. And I think this case was something that showed no matter what the worst part of life or what you go through, you can still keep going. Like, this girl had her whole life almost taken away from her. She had her innocence robbed, she had her arms taken off, and she's still going. She did not let him win. And I feel like that is an insanely inspiring act to keep going no matter what. I just hope you guys really enjoyed the case, and I was shocked and saddened that the system failed these two women. But I was kind of motivated at Mary Vincent and her story of prevailing through anything, to be honest with you. She is known to me as a strong female who lived through it and got through it. And I hope anyone who is listening who is younger really listens to the warnings of this case. Do not get in a car with strangers. Do not trust strangers, and always keep your guard up. I will be back next week with a whole new case. I hope you guys really liked listening into this one. If you guys have any suggestions or want to hear a certain subject, please let me know and leave a comment below. Thanks for listening in.